Hello all, Alison here. Welcome back to Words and Pictures for another few minutes of fun. The rusty crackle tags are back on the mat and the tissue paper won the vote to go first. If you voted for stamping, don't worry, we will get to stamping on crackle later on because there are going to be other rusty recipes. There are lots of different ways I create rust. Distress is not the only way to go, so we will be making some rusty crackle again, and at that point we'll do some stamping on it. But for today, we're going to be putting some tissue paper down with a little bit of colour going on. And if you've got sharp eyes and a good memory, or if you've just come straight from the Rusty Crackle video, you might be thinking, hang on, that rust and crackle doesn't look exactly as I remember it. Well, you would be right. I have already done this once, but because I messed up the introduction a couple of times and was stopping and starting, I managed to do the whole thing having just pressed stop instead of just pressing record. And then at the end of it, I pressed it again and then recorded myself clearing up. So I've rusted and crackled some new tags, and I'm going to create two more, doing pretty much the same as I did here, but with some different pictures. So I'll end up with a quartet instead of a pair. So it's all good. But yeah, at a point when I've got deadlines coming out of my ears, I could have done without that. Lesson learned. I hopefully won't do that again. So let's have a little play with what's going on here. So I've got the Holtz Photographic collage paper, which is great because it's got these amazing vintage images, little bits of script and text. And I've got some PaperArtsy Fresco paints. I've got Distress Collage Medium in matte and a spray bottle. And I'm going to have a play. Oh, I've got a couple of Distress Watercolour Pencils as well, which originally I hadn't planned to use. But when I was finishing off the other ones, I found that actually being able to add that detail was rather nice. So you'll get to see those in action as well. So for this, I'm thinking I'd like another house. I've got one house on here, sort of surrounded by little trees, and I think I'd like to use this house. So when I'm removing the image from the paper, very simple trick, I'm sure you've seen this before. Rather than cutting straight lines, which it's quite hard to make vanish into the texture, it's a good idea to do a slightly wobbly line, and this is a water brush, so I'm just putting a little line of water around this, and then the tissue paper should fairly willingly just sort of separate along that wet line. So that gives me that image, and I've deliberately kept those little jottings there because I like those, and I think that's going to go sort of down there. And I thought with that might be quite nice to have these farm labourers, because that's clearly a country farm. Apologies, that was my alarm going off to remind me to do this. I had no idea it would stop the camera, but there we are. Such is the way of things. Where were we? We were looking at a country farmhouse and looking at these farm labourers who I think I'm going to pop onto here. So again, I'm just going to take the water brush round the outside of them. I don't think I want that over there. I think I'd rather just... So again, I'm just separating the tissue paper, and I don't really need all that blank tissue paper up there because that's just going to get in the way of my crackle, and I think they're going to sort of be anchored by that bit of rustiness there. In fact, the joy of this water brush thing is it allows you to be really precise. So I am going to take it right down the side of that image there, so that that image can just kind of melt into that rusty blob that's going on there. And then on this other side, I'm in two minds really. I kind of like these people walking along the beach. Maybe. See, the thing is, I'm going to miss these seagulls, which I really liked on this image. So maybe I have to add my own seagulls. In fact, there are some seagulls here, look, that maybe I could borrow. So yeah, why don't we go for people walking along the beach? They've got a nice bit of text with them as well, which is quite nice. Do I want this number? Let's keep the number for now, and then we can decide. Let's have a look at it on the tag. So I will keep those bits because they can just be added as a little detail to anything one is doing. Always keep your bits. So they're going to go kind of there. And yes, I do think I quite like that number. But we can definitely, oh look, I've even put a water line down there. Just didn't tear along it. So they're going to be nice and beachy for me. Don't know why I think they're walking along a beach. They just have that sort of air about them of being on holiday. And then I'm just going to draw around these seagulls here, which will make them be on a beach whether they like it or not. So just carefully taking that out of the center there. And that's going to go kind of above them there. Marvellous. Let's get rid of this to one side. Now, I can obviously glue these down and then add colour over the top, but what I did on these other ones and what worked really nicely was to add a bit of tinting beforehand. So that's where these Fresco paints come in. Some Fresco paints are opaque, some are translucent, but with all of them I'm going to work with kind of a watery wash so that I don't lose the crackle underneath. So depending on what paints you're using, if they're not Fresco paints, that's completely fine. Obviously I love them. I work with PaperArtsy, and I've kind of never found an acrylic paint I prefer a chalk acrylic with this kind of ease of use. So let's see, at the beach, I think we're going to go, I'm going to echo what I did before. I'm going to go with some summer sky. Oh look, there's the little dried bit out of the... Lots of people also preserve those and use them as little embellishments in mixed media work, so you can hang on to those too. And I think for the beach hut, maybe that's what's, I think that that's a beach hut down there, which it may or may not be. It just has a feel of Trouville or Deauville or one of those glamorous resorts on the French Normandy coast. And maybe we'll use a bit of Seaglass, I don't know. So I've just got a simple craft brush. I'm going to dip it in a bit of water and create myself a nice watery wash down here with a bit of beach and a bit of summer sky. And I'm just going to, yeah, pop it on over the crackle. Plenty of water to help it spread out and be nice and loose and easy. Yeah, see, I'm already enjoying that. That's pretty much where the seagulls are going to be. So they're going to get blue sky, maybe just a little way above them as well. That'll be nice. Here are going to be my people. So I want to try and slightly avoid their dresses so that they can keep their nice white dresses. And I might go in with a bit slightly stronger beach hut kind of element for just behind them, as though they're walking away from the sea. So I'll take some that side and some that side, and maybe a little way underneath. And this is not, I mean, this is not realistic painting. This is just adding a sort of sense of summer sky to the landscape. And then over here, I'm going to have the house down here. So again, I think I could use this same sort of mix, which will enable them to maybe a bit less beach hut and a bit more summer sky. And I'm just going to allow that to spread out sort of around the basic shape of the house. And then the same up here, they're going to be anchored to this rust. So the sky is going to be kind of like so. And you can see that as I'm adding that paint, because it's a lovely watery wash, if anything, it's accentuating some of the crackle because it's going down into those cracks. But it absolutely doesn't cover up anything that's going on. And then this one, we're out in the country, so I'm going to have some bits of green as well. Just trying not to get my tissue paper involved in the painting, because that would be a shame. Once that tissue paper gets wet, it's not going to cooperate very well with anything else I want it to do. So popping down a bit of, what have we got here? Granny Smith and tinned peas, which are just sort of nice earthy summer greens. And so under the house, yeah, there's quite a lot of grass there. So I think we'll just go with a sort of green swathe and a little bit of tree going on over here. So we'll just help that to happen. But as you can see, I'm keeping it very loose, like so, and hopefully a nice bit of white. If I feel like I've gone over where the house is going to be, if this is still wet enough, which it is, thankfully, I can pick up some of that blue, just lessen it a little bit. Of course, once the paint is dry, it's staying. So you could go over it with some white paint if you were really desperate to clear away that colour. But I think I'm fine because the roof of the house is quite dark, so I think that's going to be fine. And then these guys could also have a bit of green, couldn't they? Look, because they are standing surrounded by trees and grass and all kinds of lovely stuff. So there's a bit of green there and a bit of green there. Again, just to sort of help that imagery have a bit more presence. Do I want any green going on over here? Not at the moment. That's all good. So one of the key things with this is I really need to let it dry. I'm a bit sad about all this paint that's left on here. So what I'm going to do is grab, I've got a little gessoed book page just sitting here. I'm just going to, yeah, there we go. Use some of that paint onto there. And I've got a background to play with another day. Where am I going to put it down? Put it down over there. Got another gessoed book page. I always have gessoed book pages around. They're kind of a fundamental part of my making process very often. So again, just picking that up. And again, I've sort of got sky at the top and earth at the bottom. So that'll be a thing later. I think I can probably bear to mop up that much paint. So before we apply the tissue, I want to make sure that this surface is absolutely dry. So I'm just going to give it a little blast with the heat gun and I'll be right back to add my tissue paper. Back in a sec. Right, we're fully dry and I've zoomed in a little bit so that you can take a closer look at what happens next. Distress Collage medium. Again, any good glue will do this, but what you might want with some glues is to add a little bit of water because you do want quite a moist application or a soft application at any rate. And also it's a good idea to use quite a soft brush. This is one of the little children's craft brushes from a certain Swedish furniture store. You pick them up in the toy area. They come in a set of, it's either 5 or 6. Different thicknesses, different sizes, and they're great for just craft paints and craft purposes. So when you're getting your tissue paper to just rest into the crackle, it's moisture that will help that process to really happen. I'm just going to take off that bit there, which I really don't need. I know I said no straight edges, but actually because the image has got a straight edge and it's lining up with the edge of the tag, I think I'm going to kind of go with this one. And what I would usually do is I'd add some glue direct to my crackle. So here's one reason. I've been saying to people that distress isn't necessarily my favourite rustiness. And here's one reason, is that distress obviously stays water reactive. So as soon as I'm adding moisture over the top, that could move. So I have to be a bit careful. And then applying glue to the tissue paper, I'm working from the centre outwards, just to get a good coverage, and I'm being quite gentle. People do all sorts of clever things, gluing their tissue paper, resting on plastic wrap or cling film or pieces of acetate so that you can then peel it up again. But I find that this silicone craft mat works perfectly well. Once you put it down, you're not really going to be able to reposition. So it's important to just be bold. And then I'm going to just gently smooth that down in. And what I also find helps is take the water brush at this point and just add a little bit of, I mean, I'm not squeezing it. The nib is damp. So I'm just adding that extra bit of moisture to the tissue paper to just really help me let it make contact with what's underneath. And then here's a place to be very careful. I'm smoothing with the finger. I'm just, in fact, I might make my finger a little bit wet to just make sure. just gently, little circular motions, again, from the center outwards. And I'm just smoothing the paper down to let it really get in touch with all that texture underneath. A little bit more water, again, just to give me a smooth contact with that surface. If there's any extraneous glue, I'm kind of pushing it to the edge. If there are any air bubbles, but I seem to have done okay with that. So you can see at the edge here, it's not quite gluing down over all this texture. And actually, I think I want to prioritize the texture. So although you can, look at this, you can really get the texture that's underneath, but it will slightly soften it. It can't help it. It's, you know, you're putting a layer of tissue paper over it, so however translucent you get it to be. But I'm just tearing the bottom of that image away so that I get that. And then at this side, I'm going to do a similar thing, just while it's still wet, so I can sort of govern how much is happening there. And then what can also help is just a little touch of the medium over the top. Will just help to seal in that moisture and that image into the tag. So same thing up here. I know approximately where I want them to sit, like so, out in the fields. And again, I think I'm going to remove, I don't really need this bit here, and it's just going to cover up some crackle. Don't really need this bit here, and it's just going to cover up some crackle. Oh, nearly lost a tree. It's all good. So again, here, I'm just going to put some glue direct onto the crackle so that that surface is ready and moist and prepared for them. Then turn this over from the middle outwards. And you really want to try and get everything covered, because an air bubble is your enemy at this point. So if there's a place that hasn't got glue on, that's where you're likely to get air sitting. I mean, it gives you extra texture. So I'm prepared to live with it if it happens. And I just want them sort of in contact with that rustiness. Oh, and I prepared all this lovely green for their grass, didn't I? So let's move them to there. So again, from the center, just pressing gently outwards. This time I'm going to take the glue brush first, just to get that slight sense of sealing and strengthening the tissue paper. Then I might add a bit of extra moisture. That's just going to let me head over the top. Again, with that soft circular motion. And I really enjoy how that subtle tinting behind just anchors the image into what's going on. I also really love that we've got rusty colours. Of course, if you've got rust, you can't not have rusty colours. But for the most part, my colour palette only turns to rust in the autumn. You get your browns and oranges, and then I can't work in anything but autumnal colours when we get there. But at this time of year, as you'll have noticed, it's the blues and the greens that really snag at my heart. And so what I like is that along with my rust, I've got some of my summery blues and greens, but that they also then have an echo of a sort of coppery distressed patina or patina, up to you, according to where you're from, really. That there's that kind of sense of, yeah, greeny blue summer, but greeny blue coppery distress that goes along with these rusty decayed tags. Grand. So I'm going to do exactly the same process with these two. I feel like you don't really need to see me do that. So I'm going to glue these ones down. I'm going to let the seagulls soar above them, and I'll be back with the finishing steps. Great, all glued down, and I've also given them a little blast with the heat gun to make sure that we're fully dry. And I'm going to do just a little bit of additional colour over the top, just because I can. and I might do a little bit of paint and a little bit of watercolour pencil. So I think I'm going to do the version where I dip that watercolour pencil in the water and then just give it a little moment. As with all watercolour, it just needs a bit of time for the water and the pigment to make friends with each other and be ready to play. If you've seen the Sunday swatching with the Distress Watercolour Pencils, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because we went through it all in great detail. So that's just allowing me to apply colour very precisely, just to add a little bit of extra summer sky. This is Tumbled Glass. Perfect kind of beachy feel to that. And then with the watercolour brush, I'm just going to soften the edges of that and let it spread out. I really love how this woman has kind of vanished into the rust here. There's a sort of ostracizing. We don't want her company. We're sending her to Coventry. She's off into the rust. I'm wondering whether I want a little bit of sort of sandiness going on down at the bottom here. Maybe just a hint of beach. What's going to be good for that? Maybe some mustard seed. Those are your very yellow sands. Come unto these yellow sands. What's that? That's the Tempest. It's a song in the Tempest. So I'm just a hint, and I already want to make it browner because I don't do yellow. So just a sort of hint of sand under our feet. And if you don't like it, which I'm not sure I do, you can always dab it back with a bit of kitchen towel as long as it hasn't dried yet. And you will get some pickup even after they've dried, because they're never fully permanent. I think that's sort of a nice little hint, but I would prefer a brownish. So to the mustard seed, I've now added brushed corduroy, and what was the other one? I think it was probably wild honey, which is why it went even yellower. I should have done antique linen. That would probably have made me a bit happier. And I'm just going to take a bit of that yellow up between their legs. There we go. A little bit of additional colour to just hint at the beach. Yes, I quite like that. And then over here, I'm going to take my green and just give me a little bit of extra grassiness under the house. That applies quite nicely, and maybe help this tree to be a little bit more present. And why not these trees up here? This is peeled paint, by the way. Yeah, and again, I'm just going to gently nudge that back a bit. And I might, under their feet, give them a little bit of tinned peas, just because that's a slightly softer green, so everything's not the same green. Again, I'm going to do it with the water brush. Oh look, and I've picked up the watercolour paint as well. This is real mixed media. Just totally mixed my media. My grass and my... So I'm just allowing that to spread out. And I do love that sort of softening of the colour across the background, across the crackle. So yeah, maybe I will be a bit bolder about this beach. Maybe that's what it needs. Maybe I was a little bit tentative. Maybe I'll go, but with a colour that's not going to give me a headache. I am going to go antique linen for my sand. Again, I'll dip in, let it warm up a little bit, let that water and that pigment start to make friends. Yeah, that's a happier sand colour for me. And also, having been on the beaches of Normandy, they're not, it's not the Bahamas or the Maldives in terms of the colour of the sand. And I'm going to let that sand just drift away down here, because as I say, I'm enjoying the drifting of colour. Just going to put a little bit more over this blue so that we're really earthing them. And I don't know if you can see, but that's the tissue paper just starting to come up there. So I'm going to quit while I'm ahead, not tear his feet off. Stop. That's the key. Just dab those to dry them so that the paint doesn't continue to go everywhere. These are solid pigments, so they will continue to leak pigment if you don't just let them dry a little bit. And then when I was creating these first two, it just so happened that I had lying around on the craft table these two Tim Holtz quote chips already with their backs peeled off, because I'd tried them on another project and decided I didn't want them there. But this time I've dug them out, so you can actually see the process that last time I was only able to talk about, of just peeling a few layers of cardboard back. So you could, I mean, you could absolutely put it on with its full thickness. That would be quite nice. It would be quite nice. But I think that for these, I don't want it that much in my face. I want it just a little bit less obvious. Find joy in the ordinary, I think, is probably these guys over here, in their world, in the countryside, in the farming, in the natural land. Remember the now when you go on holiday. So important to remember the now. Or do we want to take the scenic route? I think I quite like take the scenic route. They look like they've got time to go all the way around the cliffs of Etretat. So let's let them do that. So this is going to be the only one where it's going all the way across, just because it's a slightly, I think is it a bit much if it's sticking out? Maybe not. I like the off-centeredness of these. I mean, absolutely you could put this straight across the middle, but to me it's just a little bit dull. So yeah, I'm going to set that off that way and that off that way. And then with these, all I do is take a fingernail, thumbnail as it happens, and just take off a few layers of cardboard. They peel off really easily. And then I usually hang on to those because I can use them to bump up something else, somewhere else, when I want a bit more depth or a bit more prominence for something. So yeah, I'm taking it almost all the way to the very final layer. That's one half. That's really going to take us down to quite thin, but you know, we'll take what we get. Here we go. So with those, it's just a little bit of my acrylic glue. Down onto here. I've lost my words now. Where have they gone? Oh, they're on there still. Pay attention, brain. A little bit of acrylic glue. And offset it in the other direction. Grand. So, as is my wont, I think I'm going to add a little bit of rusty wire, not around the tags, although that's something I showed in the previous video. For this one, I think it's just going to be as these are, a little bit of rusty wire over the top. And because this rust, I'm looking at it, is a little bit darker and a little bit grungier, I might just add a little bit of darkening around the edges here with, this has got some walnut stain ink on, I think. So I'm just going to deepen that rusty texture a little bit and also add to the edges. You'll see I haven't even really dipped this in ink, but I could do, and I might dip it in archival ink rather than, so it's Distress Archival Ground Espresso, just to add a little bit more depth to the rust on these two, especially around the bottom here. That's where I really want it. There we go. So I'm going to add some rusty wire into the top of these, and then I'll be back with a little close-up montage of our whole quartet. Actually, look, I'm seeing that this is still a little bit wet, and what I do want to do is add maybe a little bit of spatter, a little bit of green and blue spatter I had on the others, and I'm sort of quite tempted to do the same here. Again, that's with that sense of rusty, coppery patina is just what I want to catch with that. It's not a representational thing. It's a sort of impression of a different kind of decay. Great. So the rusty wire is going to go on, and I'll be back, as I say, with a close-up montage, because as always with texture, it's in the close-ups that you really see the beauty of that. While I'm clearing the decks for that, I'm just going to pop a couple of wooden clothes pegs on these so they can do the job of holding those down. till the glue is fully dry, whilst I get on with preparing your montage. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing that tissue go down with a touch of colour. If you have, please leave a thumbs up, leave any comments or questions down below. And if you haven't already subscribed, I'd love it if you join us on this crafty journey. And have a great weekend, everybody. Happy crafting all.